Good morning, everyone. Our next session is what makes AR special. We have Avi Zeev with us, who's the principal of Reality Prime. Avi?
Thank you. You have the cutouts? All right, let's open. Hello, thanks for coming. So I've been in this business for a long time, 30 years coming up, and I think it's really hard for me to imagine a different path, but the most important thing about this development for me has been both my own growth as an individual and as well as the different projects that I've been working on all the time. They started out in the VR space with a lot of the same stuff we're talking about today, and I'd say evolved past that into AR and to try to figure out how all-day wearable glasses will be impacting our lives in the future. So I'm going to talk a bit more about that. Here is the agenda for what we're going to cover today. I'll do my best to get this done in time. And I have an additional article up on Medium that'll show up in about 20 minutes, hopefully, that'll expand on some of the things that I won't have time to get to today. So I encourage you to all check out Medium later on.
Begun to document our history from your example.
No, not historical documents. They're not all historical documents. I mean, surely you don't think that Gilligan's Island is a...
Our company is now Meta. Starting with the most important experience of all, connecting with people. Connecting with people.
Oh, that's not right. No.
3D street art? That's cool.
Send that link.
Privacy and safety need to be built into the metaverse from day one.
Those poor
If you
people.
could be at the office without the commute, you would still have that sense of presence, shared physical space, those chance interactions that expect to invest many billions of dollars for years to come.
No ship. It's all real. Oh my God, I knew it. I knew it. I knew it.
Now, just because the haircuts are similar, I'm not saying Mark Zuckerberg is a Thermian, although you never know. So let's talk for a second how we got here. I think it's important to review a little bit how the web evolved to understand maybe how the metaverse is going to evolve. So back in 1995, a few years after I started, cyberspace was the big hot word. Today, cyber really just means security, right? And it's entirely possible that the metaverse may go through a similar transformation. I think it largely depends on if the stuff that people ship is good or not. If it's not, the word will probably get relegated and something else will become hot. Web3 is also hot today, and Web 3D was something that was hot a while ago, so if you put them together, maybe you get back to the old Web 3D. And strangely enough, I'm learning that kids like to use the word versing to mean, like in verses, A versus B. So versing may actually become texting in the future. People get online together and play. That'll be really interesting to watch. We'll see how slang evolves. I don't make up the words. Really, everybody makes up the words. I'm just here to kind of report on it. So how did the web evolve? There is no map. It's important to think, like, first there was a web page, just one page. And then there was another page, and it linked to that first page. And then there was another page, and another page. And eventually, it winds up looking like what we call the web. There's no map. Nobody designed it. It happened organically. And then, of course, later on, you have Facebook coming in and making their own versions of this. But this still really did happen organically. And it's very likely the metaverse will happen in a similar way. Two people get together in a space, a virtual world, and there's no reason to connect it to anything else. There's nothing else to connect to. Later on, three people get together. Maybe they decide there's a reason to link it. Maybe someone comes along and makes a massive multiplayer game and decides that needs to be linked to something else, so we connect them. Other things get connected, and so on and so on. And eventually, we wind up with a web that is the metaverse, which is very similar to the web we had, but maybe now it's embodied, it has people, and it's a little more three-dimensional. And it requires interoperability, of course, to be able to make that happen. These links are very important. Okay? So when interoperability fails, this is what you get. every site just contains screenshots of every other site because that's the only thing you can cut and paste between the sites. So hopefully we don't wind up with that world. We'd rather see something more like portals, like you could actually step through a doorway or a bubble to get to the next world. But that's complicated because it requires us to render the next world in the current one. And I don't know that we really want to be sharing geometry and assets across the worlds. That requires a lot of trust, a lot of permissions. So maybe that happens a little bit differently. So, but we can think about this like the web in terms of links and references and iframes. In fact, iframes were meant to be kind of a sandboxed world, which you can think of as like a portal to another space embedded in this one. So those things map to all the problems that we have to solve for the metaverse. How do we solve linked worlds, composite worlds, where some worlds include elements of other worlds, and portals where we can step through and preview in advance what's happening on the other side. So if you look at the definition of the metaverse, I have trouble with some of these definitions. Some people describe this as the sum of all virtual worlds, even including AR. And this kind of chafes me a little bit, because if you think about it, that's dangerous. We don't want to create the sum of all things. Some of those things are private. Many of those things are private. Maybe even most of those things are private. And so we don't want to just naively link them all together or form one giant map. But we want to be able to protect boundaries, and that the things that need to be shared, and other things remain in their state of protection. So I say hell no to the idea that all apps and everything else must live in a shared address space and be able to share everything, but the interoperability is still quite important. Zoom was a good example of this. Early on, we saw Zoom was not protected well enough, and there was a thing called Zoom bombing, where people just show up in your Zoom. That's not what we want to happen in our conversations. We don't want people just randomly showing up like there's a portal in for everybody to show. So we need to be very thoughtful about this. So let's talk about why is AR special. First, there's not just one coordinate system. We like to think about the global coordinate system quite a lot, but there's the local coordinate system. Objects can be relative to the room you're in. They can be relative to another object and track it and follow it around. Those things don't really care where you are in the world. They work anywhere. They could be the same product in any location will have a similar experience. And of course, our bodies can be tracked. That's what all these lenses and filters are about. And there are also, when we have head-mounted displays, there'll be some things, hopefully the minimum amount of things will be in a heads-up display. But those are locked to the glasses. So there's all different coordinate systems to worry about. And they're all relative to something, only some are relative to the planet. So here's a bunch of planets. Let's assume these are all different planets. And I want to kind of illustrate for a second what happens when you do AR wrong. If you treat AR as the sum of all virtual worlds, you get this mess. If these are all different planets. Well, first of all, in the metaverse, we should be able to hop between these if they're all separated. If you wind up with a large galaxy of planets, you could just easily take a spaceship and jump around. But in AR, they all map back to latitude and longitude to some degree. And if we were to overlap these things, we get a real mess. So I'm going to try to visualize that mess for you. Here's my friend Keiichi Matsuda's hyperreality. Hopefully you've all seen the video. I'm not going to play it. But this is just one layer, which happens to be covering literally everything you can see. And what if I were to add more layers? Here's another world superimposed on that world, and a third superimposed on that. Pretty quickly, even just 3 layers in, you can't make sense of it all, right? So clearly we need to have some filtering. People talk about the idea of channels or layers, but even that honestly won't be enough. I think what really matters is to think about the future glasses as the filter. The glasses are the things that are gonna help us only see what we wanna see. And we're going to do that based on our personal data, based on our context. So here's the complicated world again. And if we decide to filter it to see only the places, let's say, to go skating, or whatever that filter happens to be, we're going to see a much saner world with only a minimum amount of information necessary to us. And at the same time, our personal data, the fact that we might like skating, isn't leaked out to the world. So all the web bugs and trackers out there shouldn't be able to glean that information by the fact that we asked about it. We should be protected in both directions, from too much information and leaking information. So I like to talk about this as the difference between verses and purses. So there's another layer. Verses are potentially the worlds out there. Purses are our own personal things. They're different. And I wanted to define just a few things here that'll help with that process. A contextual discovery engine is something that has access to our personal information, never lets it out, but it's used to find things in the world and bring those to us, okay? A personal AI shield also helps protect us from scams. Think of it as your digital twin, your alternate personality that knows you well enough, but prevents the world from learning about you if you don't want it to. And holographic telepresence is probably the most important experience in AR because it's how we're all going to be connecting to it in the future, but actually both AR, VR, across all worlds. So here's an example of why AR is personal. We have an ad in the world. Well, ad block isn't just going to remove the ad. We're going to replace it with something that's personal. Wouldn't it be great to walk around and whenever there's an ad, you see family photos, you see things that matter to you? It's your world, and you're the only one that sees it. So that's an important clue as to what's part of the metaverse versus what's personal. If only you see it, it's yours. It's not part of the metaverse. And so the idea of lines on the ground, the pathways showing you how to get where you're going. Nobody else shares those paths because then they'd know where you're going. So you see that alone, and a hologram that shows up may very often be only seen by you unless it's a group call, and then the people in the group will see it. I also say AR is bigger than the metaverse, and I don't mean this in terms of the volume of content. The volume of content in the metaverse will be huge, but it's the ubiquity of it. The fact that we'll be wearing our AR glasses 18 hours a day, potentially, it's more personal to us, therefore it's more ubiquitous to us. And in fact, the same interfaces that work in the real world may also work really well in the virtual world. So we'll be applying a lot of these same ideas across any reality, across any world. It doesn't have to be. If you have a fantasy world, you can use sticks and stones, whatever you want. But the core paradigms will be the ones that are shared. Therefore, I think it's going to be bigger. And the fact that more of our data is personal, the stuff we interact with, it has to do with us mostly. So if the metaverse essentially is the internet, the next generation of it, and XR hardware is essentially the browser, in some sense you could say we're the browser as well, but AR-like UX is the common interface. That's an important distinction and why I don't think it's right to say that the metaverse just contains AR. AR is its own thing, and in many ways goes beyond what we talk about with the metaverse. So what else goes beyond the metaverse? Well, I think this goes a little bit to what John Hanke was talking about yesterday, and I've been saying the same things. One of the purposes of AR is to understand the world better, right? To make the world deeper and richer for us, and hopefully to help us save our role in the world and not extinct ourselves. But there's also inner worlds to explore. Why do we do the things we do? Why are we the way we are? What is consciousness? Those things are worth exploring as well. So is there one true metaverse? Well, Ori played a game show. I'm going to play another game show today. I didn't know he was going to do that, but I decided to leave this one in. So this is from the 60s, before color was invented, a game called To Tell the Truth. And what would happen is you'd have 3 contestants. One of them would be the actual person. 2 of them would be imposters, actors. And let's see which one is the real metaverse. So contestant 1 is a virtual world where people escape from dystopian reality. We all know this one. I don't need to go too far into this. Contestant 2 is, like I said, the sum of all virtual worlds, kind of the definition you might see on Wikipedia. And of course, we can move loot and avatars between worlds. And we want to impose this on the real world too, because what could possibly go wrong? And version 3 is the internet where data is spatial and decentralized, importantly. It's personal and private, and we have our idea of context, summarizing those 3 ideas. So these are best, well, the real metaverse, please stand up. These are best encapsulated by, for the first one, snow crash. Right? We have Ready Player One. For the second one, we have Facebook Meta. I'm not quite ready to call them Meta yet. And of course, Keiichi's movie is a good example of that second one, where he's showing what can go wrong. And the third one, I think often we call a spatial web and Web 3. It includes holographic telepresence. So I'm not going to tell you what the right answer is. You can decide for yourselves. What I really want to do, though, is take this apart and actually decompose these definitions down to a deeper level so that we can really understand what's going on here. So most of us are familiar with this happening already for autonomy, for cars. Big mess. Is my car autonomous? Is some other cars autonomous? Yes, no. So they came up with a chart to help us figure it out. Levels of autonomy. So I'm proposing we do the same thing, and I'm just going to start the process. I don't think I have to be the authority on this, but I'm going to start it, and if anyone wants to help improve it, let me know. First of all, though, I have to have a little bit of a disclaimer. I keep using the word verse. All of us do, as if verse means world. Let's just, even though we're going to abuse the hell out of that word, let's understand it doesn't actually mean world. It means to turn. And you can see a bunch of definitions that have that root in them. And metaverse essentially means turn beyond. It doesn't really mean a world beyond, but that's okay. We're gonna mess with it, but I want to be really clear about that. So I'm going to give you a couple of practical definitions as well. Firstly, the adverse. The adverse was coined by Matt Meisniks. It is a seemingly free reality in which everything is funded by advertising. That is kind of the world that we are in now on the internet. The Dejaverse may be a future iteration, but there's a lot of things we've seen before. Maybe they're better than they were, but we're repeating a lot of the same things we've done for 20 or 30 years. The meterverse is a little different than the metaverse. That's the metaverse in which everything we do costs money or time or privacy. And it is in fact what some people are aiming to build, for better or worse. And finally, the verb form of metaverse. To metaverse is an act of punditry in which takes any cool idea from the last 30 years and calls it the metaverse. All right, so now that we got that cleared up, here are the 7 major verses that I've been able to identify looking at history and looking into the future. So we're currently in the adverse, moving towards the Deja-verse. Things, like Second Life, that was hard to call that Deja because it's one of the first, but it's been emulated quite a lot. It's a good example of it. Roblox is a better example of it. It's been more successful than Second Life was. And there are a lot of really thoughtful people moving into the next verse, which is what I'm going to call the transverse, which is all about transporting things between worlds. So the things we'll solve, I'll show you a bigger chart in a second. Then, of course, we have the metaverse. So I'm saying the metaverse, narrowly defined, is that 4th spot in. But there are things beyond the metaverse as well. We don't have to stop there. It's a point along the way. And when we start thinking about going outside and doing things, then we have what Google and Apple Maps are already doing, what Niantic is doing, and even REI is getting into AR. And that we're going to call the exoverse. Exo means outside. Asoverse means inside. And that's when we start looking within ourselves. There'll be whole universes within ourselves that we can understand. So I'm trying to move the target out a little further beyond metaverse. And ultimately, I'll talk a little more about the holoverse and what that means. Again, I won't have time to go into all these, so look for the Medium article. I just finished it this morning, and it explains what all these things are in more detail. That, of course, is the vast future that is blue sky. We don't quite know what it is yet. So here's the full chart. Take pictures with a bunch of technology in each one. I am, like I said, not going to go into each one, but it's all there to talk about. And I'd love to open up that conversation about what do we mean by levels of versality and what should be in each column. I want to note that we don't have to do these in order as well, just like autonomy doesn't have to be solved in order. It's just a way of helping to classify what anything does, what anybody builds, and to see which level it matches up with. Hopefully that's helpful. Of course, then there's level 99. I don't even know how many levels it's going to take to get to the holoverse, but that is the angels. Okay, 3 minutes left before questions. I want to throw out a couple of ideas. I know there's a lot of people who have said, well, now that you know who is calling themselves you know what, we need a new name, right? We can't be, what we don't want is that name to keep referring back to the company because that's not really what we mean. I wonder sometimes if the company hopes that it goes generic in the same way that Google and Xerox became generic. Maybe that's their play, or maybe they're going to go around and sue people who are using it. We don't know yet. But it certainly doesn't purport to be very collaborative when you take the name everyone's using. So what's going on with all this stuff? I wrote an article. If you haven't read it, go check it out on Medium called World War M. I actually had a hint that this renaming was going to happen because I'm associated with a company who had some of the IP that was acquired, so I knew a little bit in advance. What is going on, I think, is a term we had at Microsoft called licking the cookie. What it means is there's cookies on the plate, you're not ready to eat them yet, but you lick it and you put it back on the plate so no one else will eat that cookie. That's really what I think is going on here. But unfortunately, there's another side to this too, which is if you've seen Squid Game, there's a sense of urgency in licking the cookie, that if we don't lick the cookie fast enough, someone else is going to get it. Or maybe we'll get it in the back of the head. It does seem a little desperate, doesn't it? There he is. Okay. So here's the dilemma. I'm going to try to suggest some new names, but the dilemma is if you suggest a popular name or one that becomes popular, the same thing's going to happen all over again. Companies will try to claim it. Everybody will push their ideas into it. So I'm actually proposing, let's pick a boring name. And just like the www, the popular name web surfing will come out organically. We don't have to design this. Let it happen when it happens. Now, not all of you agree with me, but this is my proposal. So most of you probably will just stick with Metaverse, honestly. I don't expect you all to jump to a new name. That's totally fine. But what I'm going to propose, first of all, is what I call the Whateververse. Rebecca Evans actually tweeted this first. I want to make sure she gets credit for this. But the Whateververse is, call it whatever you want. We don't care. Just tell us what it does. That's the most important thing. But also consider that we have some scientific words. Virtual worlds have been around since the 80s. We know what that means. It hasn't been messed up too badly. Presence hasn't been messed up too badly. We know what that is. Co-presence hasn't been messed up too badly yet. That's a scientific term for us being in this shared space together, virtually or potentially even reality. So I'm going to propose one word that isn't yet in scientific literature. I searched, someone can find it, let me know. Co-reality could be one of those words we use for the collection of co-present spaces where we're all together. So if you want to use a more scientific word that won't get abused because it's boring, go with co-presence, all right? So here's the first one. Let's put all these words together and we get co-reality. Now I happen to have the domains for this, but I'm offering, if anybody wants to open this up, I will donate those domains, okay? I will donate them, guaranteed, to make this happen, if you all agree that you like this name. The other name that I have absolutely no ownership over is all the web stuff. So we've heard of Web 3, Web 3.0, Web 3D, Web XR, and I would propose if you want to mush these together, they could show up potentially as Web 3.D, as something new, but the same as what we already know. That's kind of the mashup of all of these things. So it's up to you. You can choose the names you want. All right, I think we're ready for questions. So come on up to the mic if you have any questions. There's Mr. Lorenzini.
Starting price for the domain?
0.
Sold.
Yes.
No, I love how you look at the world, man. And it's really a crazy spaceship that's lifting off literally underneath our feet. And if you're going to spend your time and attention to address what you feel is the most important issues, where are you going to spend your time?
That's a really good question. I think the thing that's most important for the betterment of humanity is getting co-presence right. I don't think that we all want to put on headsets to enter a meeting room that is as boring as the ones that we have today. Like, what is the point of doing that virtually? Yeah. Let's do something better. Like, let's even think about how to get rid of meetings. How can we do this all asynchronously? And you see that already in some of these services, Discord, whatever. They're starting to think about, let's ditch the meetings and come up with something new rather than just staring at the wall and looking at the PowerPoint like we did for 30 years already.
Yep, great stuff.
Thanks.
What steps should we be taking now to get us towards that path that's the better path in the future?
Well, there's a lot of steps. And so what I'm trying to do is I've been trying to work with people more in academia and activism to try to educate first. Like, what are the dangers? What is going to happen when we have, let's say, advertising in XR, right? How can it be good? How can it be bad? Maybe there are ways we can head this off and let's only enable the good things and try to really limit the bad ones. If we know what the harms are, we know some of the harms, and so I've worked with Britton Heller and written other articles to try to promote these ideas so that there's just more awareness about it. So that's the first step, make everything more aware. I do think we will need some sort of regulation here. The First Amendment limits a lot of what we can do in this space, for better or worse. But I do think there are places that we can start regulating behavior without limiting the growth of these industries, and we should be thinking about that as well.
Okay, but I guess this is the startup track. I'm a startup founder. Probably there's others in there. What should startups be doing?
Wow, there's a whole bunch of unsolved problems out there. Everybody's excited about NFTs. I'll bring that up for a second. The other word, the N word, as opposed to the M word, the other N word. Sorry. And I think that there's a lot of good. I'm glad that artists are getting paid. First of all, there's a lot of people who really had their stuff stolen, but there's a lot of people who are still getting their stuff stolen, even with NFTs. People are minting their NFTs on their art, and I think there's something beyond that we should be thinking about, where we can design systems, and startups can think about this, that create abundance instead of exploiting scarcity. That's an important one to try to grow the overall ecosystem. So I think there's room for startups there. I think it's difficult for startups to compete with the big players when it comes to things like co-presence. Those are going to be essentially parts of the operating system, and it's very difficult to compete with the operating system. But I do think if you move one level up the stack, Like one of the companies that I work with is called Campfire, who's demoing here today. Just a short plug for them is that they're not trying to reinvent co-presence. What they're trying to do is to give you something important to do, like find the design workflow and make that work well in XR. And that's something really useful to everybody. Most people stop at the beginning stage, just make it work. Now we can talk to each other and we can scribble on a shared whiteboard, but that's not enough. We need to study their actual workflow and then make sure that's supported in XR so that people can actually get real work done. And so other companies in that space could hopefully do great things as well and make it so that people will really use this stuff and not just live at the proof of concept stage.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hey, Avi.
Hey, Tony.
Long-time listener, first-time caller. Good talk. You're getting
What's the
better.
question,
You're getting
Tony?
better. You'll be good one of these days. Now, it was fucking awesome.
One of these
That was
days
awesome.
I'll be really good.
Hey, I have a question.
Yeah.
What's up with that T-shirt?
Well, that's a good question, Tony. The T-shirt is asking a question, what does it stand for? And the first question to ask is, are we mean the X, right? I think we know the answer to that, maybe. The X means everything. But what does the guild stand for? And you should look for announcements coming shortly. What we're going to be trying to do is come up with a set of principles that people in the field may subscribe to. And if they do subscribe to those, they may want to join and put our weight together in order to speak with one voice on the issues that we care about. Also, just to meet really cool people who have fun ideas. Thanks. One more?